What do you do when you hear someone make an offensive comment at work? All right, so I got a letter from a viewer, and she asked, what does she do? She's a newer employee, and she's frequently hearing comments that are either racist or sexist or something else that's offensive. They talk a lot about politics in her office. They talk a lot about sexuality and sex and drinking at the bar. And she said, what do I do? How do I address those types of comments? I've got the answer.
What do I say?
DanTheGunnerTraining.com.
Tilt your head forward as if you're about to ram them with your invisible horns, and here's what you say. That type of language is not tolerated here and will be dealt with very severely. Say that after me. That type of language is not tolerated here and will be dealt with very severely. Repeat that again. That type of language is not tolerated here and will be dealt with very severely. All right, that is the first line of attack. And you are attacking, okay? That is the first line. There's a reason why we'd say it that way. Remember, most people at work have their sentence structure all wrong. In situations such as the one we just described, some people would say things like,
I find that language offensive.
yeah, well, no one cares what you find. You might find it offensive, you might find it, enthralling, you might find it a savory little treat in the afternoon. It doesn't matter how you find it. Or if you are offended by it, who cares? It's not about you, and it's not about me, it's not about how we feel. It's about that language. That's all it's about. There are very clear guidelines regarding that language. And remember, on the same subject, a lot of times we'll say things at work like, I need that report by the end of the day. It's not about your needs. When we are addressing important issues at work, remember that the powerful communicators we see can deliver messages with power and clarity. They know how to place subjects in the sentence. They know how to structure a sentence. And remember that in a sentence, the beginning of the sentence, that's where the power lives. That's where we place our subject generally. And remember that when you misplace your subject or you put something at the beginning of a sentence that does not belong there, it shifts the power and detracts from your message. So instead of saying,
I need that report by the end of the day,
instead of making the report the focus, I'm making my needs the focus. And if you do that at work, remember that the more often you say, I need this, I need that, you're projecting,
I'm needy.
you don't want to do that. So in this case, instead of saying something like,
Hey, I don't appreciate that. I find that language offensive.
really? What we want to say is, remember, put the real subject first. If the subject is that language, and what about it? Ask yourself, what about this subject? What am I really saying here? It's not about how I feel about it. It's about, wait a minute. We all came to the agreement. We all signed on that will not be tolerated. And that when it happens, we have part of this process that we should have gone through by now is decided on what the consequences would be, and they would be severe, because those types of comments not only expose us to political.
Excuse me, I'm trying to get some sleep done.
Not only Buddy's down here making a scene. Not only do they expose us to legal jeopardy, they also distract and detract from our productivity here at work, and they can hurt people. I don't want to be a part of that. So we've all decided that if it happens, there will be swift and severe consequences. That's all we want in the initial message that we send. Hey, that type of language won't be tolerated here, and it'll be dealt with severely. That's it. Not that I'm doing anything about it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that type of language is not tolerated here, and it will be dealt with severely. And then you want to look at the other people in the room. Make eye contact with them. Let them know they too are on alert. And the reason you want to do that is because we've already discussed in our training that has led up to this type of situation, us feeling like now I have dominion. In the training, we have already covered the fact that if you are listening to those types of comments, if you're a party to that, if you are at the table while they are made, you are complicit in those comments. And you will also have to face consequences because you are complicit in this behavior. And we'll talk about that later on. But that's step one. Remember, subject first, what about it, and what's going to be done about it. That type of language is not tolerated here, and it will be dealt with very severely. Now I can tell you, since I've already laid the groundwork and told you these are the rules, if I feel like saying, hey, I find that language offensive, and I will make sure that it's dealt with swiftly and severely. So now that I've already said that language, we've already discussed it, the real subject is your language. I've covered that. Now I can tell you how I feel about it. And if it comes to it, and I feel as though I need to say something else, because I don't want to add to this, we're not arguing about it. If they come back with any comment like,
yeah, well, you didn't seem to be so concerned last night when you were out drinking with your friends at the bar.
Let's say that they heard me there, and, I can tell some funny jokes outside of work, but we're at work now. And so if a comment is made, or if I'm, if he has some type of rebuttal, I can always use the, well, that may be, but, and then repeat myself after I've said we're not talking about that, we're not talking about this. I could say, well, that may be, but we're not talking about what I said at the bar, we're talking about what you just said. And I find those types of comments offensive. Now, let's say you want to go past that. We've already done all of this. I might want to give you a hostile question. And under normal circumstances, hostile questions are not allowed in a savvy communicator's conversation. They're not. But this is a little bit different. I might ask you a hostile question. And a hostile question, remember, is a statement thinly disguised as a question. Something like, Mark, did you miss the training, or do you not know that language will not be tolerated here and will be dealt with very severely? Now, I don't want to ask you something such as, now watch the difference. I don't want to say something like,
Mark, don't you know that some people find that language offensive?
Like, who cares? Why do people say things like that? I don't know. They, I think, have good intentions, but they don't know the structure or what works and what does not. And when I ask you,
do you know how other people feel about what you say?
Of course they do. That's why they're saying it. They want to offend people. They want to start a fight. I guess they don't have enough work to do, or they don't have enough on their plate. So they're wanting to start fights in the lunchroom. Don't do that. We're not talking about, again, if you know how other people feel.
Don't you know what you sound like? Don't you know that's,
Whatever. All I'm asking you is if you know or do not know that language will not be tolerated here. So if I'm going to ask a question, it's going to be structured that way. John, were you not here for the training that discussed how that language will not be tolerated here and how it will be dealt with severely? Would you like me to sign you up for that training again? I could ask that as long as I'm staying on message. Remember, stay on message. And if nothing else, a lot of people are listening thinking, I can't do that. I just cannot do that. Well, remember, as part of the leading up to this process, we should have all discussed at work how if you say these things, here are the consequences. Here's how you judge whether or not they are appropriate for work. And finally, if you are a party to it, if you are in the room and do nothing, then you are an accessory to the crime. Unless, remember, we are always communicating from our head to our toes, right? If I hear that type of language, and let's say that I'm a new employee, I don't know what else to do, you can get up and you can leave. When you get up and leave, remember, do not slouch, look at the ground, hide your eyes, hide your gaze. Don't do that. Get up and walk out the door with purpose, because there is a purpose to what you're doing. If you can't say anything, that's okay. Don't be a party to it. And one of the reasons why it's so important not to be a party to it, not to sit by and let people do this, is because that's really what causes these types of things to begin with. We all have moments where we say and do things because we're not in our right minds, and we make comments that are inappropriate or hurtful or backwards. We all do that. We count on other people to keep us in check and to let us know when we have gone off track. When we're lost a little bit, it's up to those around us to help us find our way. And when we do not have that, that's when societies fall apart. When people start to sit by and idly watch while things happen that they know are wrong, that's when the trouble really starts. And, we can see this in our personal lives. We can see this on a national level, an international, a global level. That's when the trouble starts. So if you've ever been in this situation where, for example, if you've been bullied at work or on the playground or whatever it may be, and there are other people around, especially if some of them you thought were on your team or friendly or at least decent people. I'm going to assume people are decent until they give me reason to believe otherwise. But when something happens to you in a group setting, sometimes you don't even remember the face of the person who did it. But you do remember the face of those who accompanied that person, especially if you thought that they were decent people or on your team. Because you kind of look at them and you think, I can get him. I can get her. Et tu, Brute? That's what we tend to think. Don't be that person, because that is what you will remember. When you are the person who is, let's say, the target, and you see the faces of the bystanders, those are the faces you remember until the day you die, because those were the faces that surprised you, because they are standing by and letting this happen. How could you do that? Don't be in that category. Get up and leave. And remember, get up, hold your head up high, hold your chest up, your chin up, and walk out the door with purpose, because that is sending a message, and it's very strong. I will not be party to this. And if you want to, you can say that. I won't be a party to this. Or, I can't watch this. I can't listen to this. If you want to say that, you can, and it sends a very strong message, and then you leave. And watch how people will start doing that. And remember, what gets rewarded gets repeated. What does not get rewarded eventually will not get repeated. And if people who make these types of comments at the end find themselves alone, people will tell them, you're standing alone on this. You can actually affect change in the world by your actions. You don't need to say anything. If you do say something, remember, you need to practice saying things like, that type of language will not be tolerated here, and it'll be dealt with very severely. When you say things like that, you can change words around. Now you know what the structure is. Practice saying them at home first, because we need to practice saying things like this. You can't just use that type of language because you heard it or you read it or you saw it. You have to practice saying it. Professional language, or confrontational language, which is really what we're talking about here, is something that we learn how to do. It's just like any other language. You can't read a book on Spanish or listen to an audio or a video on Spanish, and then you go to Mexico and you hear somebody speaking Spanish, and voila, I know what they're saying. I'm going to answer them and start engaging now with my Spanish skills that I've learned. That's not how it works, You have to practice Spanish a lot. And then if it's not your native tongue, and then when you get to a place where they're speaking Spanish, hopefully then you can engage in it because you practiced in the past. But you can't just wait until these moments arise and then all of a sudden start trying to speak the language. Practice it at home. When somebody says something at home that's not appropriate, hey, that type of language is not tolerated here and will be dealt with very severely, young man. You might say that to your kids or your mom. Mom, that type of language will not be tolerated here and will be dealt with very severely. Okay, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. You're right. You're always right. You have to practice saying it before the event happens, because if you don't, it will not come out right. Just like any other language, you need to practice it. And if you need help on this, determining what is and what is not appropriate, or if you have a workforce that's new and does not really know how to engage in professional communication, it's not something that they tend to teach in schools, especially not regarding the communication that's going on today. Because really the global conversation has just, it's spiraling down that cosmic toilet, and it is up to each and every one of us to take a stand right now and say, no, I will not tolerate that, and I will deal with it swiftly and severely. Consequences to that behavior will be coming forthwith. We all have to take a stand. And I hope that those words help you do it. Now, if you're just starting your communication overhaul in your company, here are the first 3 steps. Number 1, subscribe to this channel using the button below. And once you've done that, number 2, push the next button, and that will bring you to my website where you will download your free professional communication starter kit. Once you've done that, come back here and watch some more of these great videos. And for everybody here at Dan O'Connor Training, I hope that whatever you do today, do it with kindness and compassion, because everything we do will be infused with the spirit with which we do it.